Hi everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about maximizing impact of Article 9 funds, closing the gap in sustainable investment for Nordic investors. Before we get started, I would like to let you know that this event is recorded and that the replay will be available on NordSIP within a few days. And now one of the reasons to stay on this live call is that you can ask questions to our experts, and you can do so via the chat. So please don't hesitate to type your questions at any time, and I'll make sure that they get asked at the right time to our experts. And our experts today are Lucia Vega-Penichet, Sustainability Product Specialist at Clarity AI. Lucia, you work with the Product Research and Innovation team. Can you tell us what your research is about?
Sure. Hey, everyone. And what we do at the Product Research and Innovation team is we transform Clarity AI's data into then the end products that are useful for our clients. I work particularly around the impact and regulatory products. So I do research around things like the UN SDGs or other frameworks that we have regarding impact. And most recently, I've been working on reading a lot of regulation and working on the development of the MiFID product and the sustainable investment product.
Great. Our other expert today is Victor Fernandez. Victor, you're Director of Product at Clarity AI, and you lead the EU Sustainable Finance Product Management team. You work closely with regulation experts to ensure full product alignment with both SFDR and the EU taxonomy. Can you tell us a few words about your area of expertise?
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. Within my role in the product department of Clarity AI, I work developing the different solutions we have so that our clients and prospects can comply with the European regulations and analyze their portfolio, looking at the metrics that the EU regs are bringing together, such as the SFDR principal adverse indicators, the EU taxonomy alignment figures, and more recently, the Sustainable Investment Article 217 definition. So we work being sure that the product we are developing really covers the different use cases and can be as helpful as possible for them.
Fantastic. And as we said, both you, Victor and Lucia, you work at Clarity AI. It's a company that was founded in 2017 with a singular mission: to bring societal impact to markets. You offer a platform that you call a sustainability tech kit. And as the company name indicates, you are using AI, so artificial intelligence, for that purpose. Victor, can you tell us in a few words what problems you solve for investment managers?
Sure. So within our investment managers, let's say, use case, we aim to provide them with the data, the methodologies, and the tech tools they need so that they can make the appropriate choices regarding sustainability in their investment tasks. Splitting it into these three pillars, data, methodology, and tools, I'll very briefly explain how we aim to bring value and differentiate in each of them, and how we try to solve some of the challenges that currently exist. First, on the data side, we believe that the current ESG data in the market is sometimes not reliable and is not fully consistent between all the different, let's say, sources or providers one can find. Besides, the coverage one would like to get on all these metrics is not as good as one would like and does not cover all the financial instruments investment managers many times have in their portfolio. How we try to solve this first challenge? On the, let's say, reliability side, Clarity AI applies artificial intelligence to avoid these mistakes by reading data from different sources and using AI algorithms to identify which is the best data point for every company and metric. On the coverage side, again, we leverage technology so that we can produce solutions at scale, covering currently more than 50,000 companies, and using AI techniques such as natural language processing to read more than 100,000 news every day and extract data points, controversies data points that can help investors to take investment decisions. Moving to the methodologic side, we see that sometimes the ESG ratings are not only based on objective methodologies, but also there is a piece of subjectivity in where sometimes analysts decide which is the ESG rating of a firm. The way we aim to solve this is by developing fully scientific and objective methodologies based on raw data that treat all companies similar as well. So that this scales and this ensures that the scorings, we don't like to call them ratings because we just provide the scorings and we tell you what is the data for each company, but we don't judge. We want to provide this data to investors so that they take decisions, so our scores can be used in an objective and scientific manner by investors. And finally, on the tool side, we know that investors need this data, these methodologies, where they are working in their workflows, not just in a data set that you share to them. So we leverage our tech capabilities. We're a tech native. So we were born as a tech company, and that's really in our DNA. So we are able to integrate very easily into the workflows of clients and offer them our data in very seamless way, aggregating it at their portfolio level, generating reports for them directly, and being where they need the data and the methodologies to be. So yeah, that's a summary of what we aim to provide.
Fantastic. And today we're talking about maximizing the impact of Article 9 funds. And I'm personally quite excited to find out what your EEA-based research and analysis can tell us, and see how Nordic investors can use those insights to improve on their sustainability journey. Lucia, can you tell us how you've gathered your insights and what kind of methods did you use, and why did you dig into this particular topic?
Sure. So, Aline, we saw a lot of confusion from our clients regarding how to interpret this Article 217, right? So we wondered how this confusion was really interfering with the end goal of the regulation, which is to bring capital flows into sustainable investments. And we will go into the details a bit later, but Article 217 has three main pillars. They are quite vague. One of them is best defined, which is the do no significant harm. And by that, I mean, they are telling, like, the regulators are making us use principal adverse indicators. So we thought, okay, this would be the pillar where, despite confusion and interpretation and methodologies, there should be the most common ground, because we know that we have to use this PAI assessment at some point, right? So that is why we decided to go into look into Article 9 funds, and particularly do no significant harm. And how we did that and what methods we used, well, we relied in our SFDR product that contains these, like, principal adverse impact indicators. And it is important to say that these indicators have been tailor-made for this product. So they are metrics that have been redefined to closely match the regulation. And in fact, we did this, and some of these indicators were co-defined in collaboration with one large asset manager in the Nordics. And, we have a lot of other asset managers that are using these products, such as BlackRock, and we recently launched a partnership with the London Stock Exchange on these products. So that goes to say that, it is a very solid product. And then behind the scenes of that product, of those PAI indicators, there is a lot of the AI that Victor was mentioning. So a lot of these PAIs rely on controversies. So we are using the NLP, and then for others where data is not available, we're using machine learning models. So yeah, this is a bit the hows and the whys of this analysis.
Perfect. Okay, so let's dive right into the topic. We have a few slides today to help our audience to follow on this quite technical topic. And to kickstart, I can ask you a starting question, Lucia. So, do you say PAI or PAI?
I know this was coming because I said both as I was talking. So yeah, to be honest, the confusion starts early on in the process with this regulation. But yeah, you will hear me say PAI more often than not. Sorry for that.
No, there's nothing to be sorry about. I think we're just figuring out the jargon all at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, Lucia, you're presenting the first question here as we're diving into the topic. So I propose that you just take it away.
Cool, perfect. So yeah, what I'm going to talk about now is about the drivers of significant harm in Article 9 funds. So as you probably might know, Article 217 has 3 clear pillars or distinct pillars. An investment should contribute to an environmental or social objective. It must do not significantly harm other objectives and ensure good governance practices. As we mentioned, this is very vaguely and broadly defined in the regulation. And what this means is that it is up to market participants in the end to decide what Article 217 means, right? So our research does not mean to provide a definition, but rather we focused on the DNSH because we know that in some way or another, PAI indicators have to be used, right? So it is a fair analysis. So jumping right into it, how are Article 9 funds really performing against some of the PAI indicators? So we see that almost 20% of the funds we analyzed, and this is a pool of about 800 funds, Article 9 funds, about 20% of them have more than 10% of their investments in companies that are violating the UN Global Compact or OECD guidelines. So this is not like a marginal contribution, right? It is quite a significant number, and this is through more than 150 companies that are exposed to things such as bribery and corruption or anti-competitive practices or environmental impacts. So here we're focusing on mandatory PAI 10 in this analysis. This is one of the PAIs that at Clarity relies on the controversies data, which uses NLP. So basically here, what we are seeing is that we're maybe able to go beneath the surface and through technology, see a lot more than maybe escapes a fund manager's eye, right? If we take a look into another mandatory PAI, the exposure to fossil fuels, the story is a bit along the same lines. More than 10% of the funds analyzed, and sorry, no, not more, almost, have more than 10% exposure to fossil fuels. And this is done through investing in more than 1,000 companies that are active in this sector. And we reckon that some of these companies might have marginal revenues from fossil fuels, even though the PAI definition is very definitive in that, right? It mentions that any revenues, like any company deriving any revenues from fossil fuel sector is exposed to this PAI. However, even if some of these companies have marginal revenues, some of them, and actually more than 500, earn the majority of their revenues from exposure to fossil fuels. So here, basically, you know, there are types and types of investment strategies, active ownership being one of them, but it needs to be very clear to investors in the end that they are investing in Article 9 funds that are exposed to fossil fuels in a significant way. Lastly, we evaluated funds against their performance on other mandatory PAIs, quantitative, like emissions to water or board gender diversity. And we saw that almost 40% of the Article 9 funds in our analysis were having more than 10% exposure, again, to companies that had very poor PAI performance. And by that, we mean they were performing in the bottom 5th percentile of Clarity AI's universe of data. The top offenders in these PAIs in this category were non-renewable energy consumption. So this is mandatory PAI 5.1, and then board gender diversity, mandatory PAI 13. And one might wonder, what is that 5th percentile, right? What does it translate to? Are we being too strict or are we not? Because 40% is quite a large number. Actually, any company that is failing our analysis in non-renewable energy consumption means they are consuming 100% of their energy from non-renewable sources. So there really isn't like any way we could whitelist these companies, right? For board gender diversity, it's exactly the same. All the companies that are failing have 0% of women in their board. So it was quite striking to see. Our main conclusion or takeaway from this analysis wasn't, however, we're being tricked and there are attempts at greenwashing, but rather that fund manager, we see evidence in this analysis and in these numbers that fund managers are in need of a way to look beyond what they're looking at now, and they need to look under the hood and understand what's going on in a more comprehensive way. And for that, we believe that the only way is through technology. It's the only way to have an easy, transparent, and scalable process that, allows for all of this. So, and thanks at Clarity AI, this is what precisely we are trying to provide. And that would be the main or some hints of what we analyzed in our white paper.
Great. We already have a question from the audience, and it doesn't pertain exactly to your presentation right now, but I'd like to take the opportunity to ask it before we get a lot of other questions. So if an Article 9 fund uses data that is estimated and provided by Clarity AI, and the regulator opposes the data, who's responsible, the fund or Clarity AI? Asks Patrick Dallin.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one if that's okay. And by the way, it's a great question and something that has come in different conversations with clients. First, that in regulation is very necessary to distinguish where estimations are being used and where not. So, for example, for SFDR principal adverse indicators, the regulation mentions that asset managers should do a best effort approach, meaning that when data is not reported by companies, they need to do their best they can do to fill in the gaps, including proxies or estimations. However, for the EU taxonomy, that's not the case. So when reporting EU taxonomy alignment, estimations are not allowed. It's only possible to report based on what the regulation calls reported or equivalent data. Just framing what can be done and what cannot be done before answering the questions. On SFDR principal adverse indicators, what Clarity AI does is that we provide reported data every time there is. We fill with estimation models when there is no data and when we believe we have high quality estimation, meaning that we do not do estimations in cases where we believe doesn't make sense. And to provide a very specific example, for social metrics such as board gender diversity, we don't do estimations. We don't believe we can say how many women in the board have a company just comparing with others, because the variability can change a lot and we don't feel comfortable with that. We provide estimations in metrics such as CO2 emissions or energy consumption, where we have a lot of inputs from the company. And by using all these inputs and our machine learning techniques, we can generate these estimations. And we always provide a confidence level. So we can tell you if the confidence level for the estimation we have is high, medium, or low, so that the asset manager also knows this and is able to be confident on this. Having said this, once the asset manager discloses this information to the regulator, it's responsibility to be sure that the data it's using, being Clarity AI or being any other source, is the let's say, best one for every different use case.
All right, so still at the end of the day, the manager is going to be responsible in front of the regulator, but you're doing the best you can to provide the best possible indication of how reliable your data is. So,
and then what we always believe needs to be done is transparency. That for us, transparency is key. So just say what is being done. Our methodologies, for example, are always transparent and can be shared anyway. So we believe that's the key, so that at least what is communicated to the regulator is exactly what is being done and there is no conceptual jump at any point.
All right, great. Lucia, do you want to take the next question?
Sure, cool.
So you're going to talk about the reasons why fund providers are struggling to categorize funds.
Exactly, yeah. So with the entry into force of the regulatory technical standards level 2 in January 2023, it's true that we've seen like a wave of downgrades that have made a lot of noise. in the media from Article 9 funds down into Article 8 funds. It is tempting to think that these are, again, like malicious intent or greenwashing attempts. However, from Clarity AI, our view is that this basically reflects that fund providers were having an approach in an uncertain landscape, and then as things are becoming clearer and they are receiving different signals, they are adapting to that, rather than, assuming that there is like a malicious intent behind it. Because we do believe that fund providers face big challenges, and particularly two main ones. The first one being, as we were saying, the uncertain regulatory landscape, and the second one being data. So for the first one, it seems like fund providers have been asked to like kind of hit a moving target, because the regulation is kind of uncovering things as we go. And I wanted to just give some examples of things that have been changing throughout the months that could have led to these downgrades. So for example, until July 2022, it wasn't crystal clear that Article 9 funds needed to make 100% sustainable investments, excluding like hedging and investments for hedging and cash purposes, and that those investments should also meet the DNSH criteria. This wasn't clear, right? And we did see Article 9 funds with lower than 50% SI on EET reported data. So it was a lack of information there that could have caused this downgrade. This is a situation that is kind of repeating itself with Article 8 funds, and I think Victor will explain a bit of that later. So we will maybe see this wave of downgrades into other Article 8, not only Article 9 funds, right? Also, for example, in November 2022, so a couple of months ago, it became clear that fund providers needed to use the same methodology across all their products instead of like tailored ones. This is not an easy thing to do, and there are a variety of objectives and strategies you can follow. So building a single methodology that is comprehensive, exhaustive, and like trustworthy is not easy. And I speak from experience, like it was a challenge to build it for the Clarity AI product, but we're lucky that we have a lot of already developed products, a lot of expertise, and a lot of data that allows us to build this framework, but this is not easy. So probably you will select, the methodology or investment strategy that is the most often used in your products, but then you might not know how to integrate it for the rest of the product. So that could mean downgrading some of these products. Again, it doesn't even look like it's the end of the story and of the changes, right? We are still tumbling like on moving sand. So many of the funds that downgraded were passive funds that were tracking Paris-aligned benchmark or climate transition benchmarks. And there's still not a clear position from the regulators on if this is enough to be an Article 9 fund, yes or no. So once it is part of the latest Q&A, so once this is clarified, we might see, the downgrades become upgrades again, and then there will be all this noise. And on top of that, recently the French AMF released a proposal to kind of revamp SFDR, and many of the things they're saying would impact directly fund categorization. So they're, for example, saying there should be a minimum requirement of EU tax alignment for Article 9 funds. And looking at our data, only 400 funds are reporting this in the EETs as of today, and we have more than 15K funds in the EETs. So only 400 are reporting, and of those, only 40% have higher than 0 EU tax alignment, right? So that would mean those 60% are out and possibly further downgrades. They are also proposing that fossil fuels should be excluded from Article 9 funds. So if we go back a few slides to what we saw, that would mean all of those funds would also need to be downgraded. So in the end, we're still walking on uncertain landscapes, and it is a big challenge that, fund providers can only be sure that they are transparent, have the right data, and make the decisions due to the right reasons, but we cannot influence really too much these regulatory landscape. The second challenge they do have, and what they can influence, however, is data. So we also did an analysis which was comparing how fund providers were reporting on PAIs versus what our own assessment. And for example, in PAI 10, the UN Global Compact violations, we saw that only about 40 funds were actually reporting exposure. So you already see very low number, and all but one were saying zero exposure. When we looked into it, we found actually that 60% of those funds had at least one company that was violating the UN Global Compact, right? So it's a very different picture. And similarly for fossil fuels, I think about 80 funds are reporting this in the EETs, their exposure. And in 20% of the cases, we are finding that they are underestimating this exposure. So really, what is going on here, right? Again, is this intentional? Is this not? We really believe there are two main root causes for this. And the first one being a lot of data providers for PAIs are kind of reutilizing metrics they had before, whereas the PAI definitions are very specific. And at Clarity, these were tailor-made and co-developed and to meet the specific definition of the regulation. So we think that is one big reason why. And the second point would be, this kind of lack of data, tools, processes to measure this. As we were saying, PAI 10, for example, in Clarity relies on NLP. So analyzing, and Victor mentioned, more than 100,000 news articles per day. So if you rely on your traditional research process and you leave technology out, it is very, very hard or very unlikely that you will be able to have, again, transparent, scalable, and easy way to categorize your funds and to understand what's going on. So basically, we believe these are the two main challenges. One, we can't really influence too much. The other, we can, for sure, through technology, through transparency, as Victor was saying.
All right, great. We don't have any question at this moment, but I'd like to remind the audience, and especially those that arrived a little bit later, that you should feel free to put your questions in the chat at any time. So now we come to the third point, and perhaps Victor, you'd like to take this. What are the regulatory challenges specific to the Nordic region that you have observed?
Yeah. So Clarity AI was founded in 2017. So we were exposed to the Nordic region before all the regulations came. And we feel that is one of the more advanced in terms of probably sustainability and developing sustainability investment strategies in Europe. We believe that one challenge comes exactly from there. So in other regions, we see that SFDR EU taxonomy has served as the first framework for investors to develop their sustainability strategies, while in the Nordics, sometimes these strategies have needed to be adapted to a new framework that, as Lucia has explained before, is still moving, is not 100% clear what requires, and this can provide a misalignment between what was doing and what the strategy was before, and now how to adapt it to new rules, new metrics, new frameworks that can yield results that are not the same. So that's a challenge that we are seeing. But we also, from Clarity AI, we believe that regulation is not only a problem or something that can hurt and be an issue for an organization, but this really opens up opportunities. And we would like to also talk about them and how this can help all the regions, but the Nordic one in specific. First is that even though last year, when looking at the inflows, outflows of the different types of funds, there were in general outflows in the financial industry, but the only type of product that saw inflows during Q4 were Article 9 products. So definitely still seems to be a market opportunity and investor demand for this. And therefore, when following this framework and all the steps that Lucia were mentioning, is definitely worth it. It might be not easy, it's hard to do things properly and to live with all this uncertainty, but it pays off in the end. The second thing is that we believe that, as we have mentioned, complying with the regulation and considering regulatory metrics into the investment process can be done efficiently. It doesn't need to be an absolute pain. It doesn't need to be something that organizations might be scared of, but using reliable data sources and advanced tech, the integration and the reporting can be done in a very easy way and not needing a lot of resources or a lot of time to do this. And that's something we are actively pushing for Clarity AI to really push this idea that this opportunity can be done seamlessly. And finally, something to always consider is that, as Lucia explained, it's very important to follow the regulatory requirements very closely, to have metrics that are 100% aligned with what the regulator said in the SFDR principal adverse indicators when calculating your EU taxonomy, your sustainable investment, to avoid any regulatory scrutiny and any risk of being appearing as a greenwashing organization. We believe the scrutiny is growing. We have seen with the headlines we were showing in the previous slide that more and more big firms are appearing. And just not to have any risk on being there in the future is very important to treat this seriously.
Great. And I see that we do have a question now in the chat. Olena Balichko is asking, have you looked at any private equity or venture capital funds and how they live up to Article 9 and 8 DNSH requirements?
Yes, very good point. First, to clarify, private equity Vertum capital funds are also within the scope of SFDR. So they can also be, let's say, Article 8, Article 9, and disclose according to this classification. We are seeing that it is not easy as in the public market because, of course, the data is more difficult to achieve. But once the exercise, so two ways to do this. On the one hand side, you can ask your private equity companies to provide this data to you and analyze which PAIs, which metrics are relevant for each of the company to do this analysis. Or another option, following this best effort approach, and something that we are helping clients with, you can take proxies from public companies to evaluate how is the, let's say, SFDR principal adverse indicator of your private companies. Think, for example, if you're invested in a private, making it up, a bank, a private company that is a bank based in the Nordics, if you consider how are the companies, other banks that are public, that are based in the Nordics, that have the same size, the same business lines, the information you can get is probably useful to make at least this assumption until data is available. So yeah.
Excellent. All right, is it time for our fourth question? What might come next for regulators and fund providers, Victor?
Yes, so from the regulatory side, we believe more details are needed so that financial market participants can take better decisions on what to do in all this new landscape. Three main points I want to highlight on the duties we believe regulators have, even though, I mean, this is a very recent regulation and it's perfectly normal that not everything is crystal clear. First, on the metrics definitions. So even though the regulators have included annexes with definitions for each principal adverse indicator, sometimes they are not so exhaustive and as we would like, so that clients can have this metric. Just to provide an example, PAI number 16 on countries exposed to social violations. They are very clear on what is a social violation in a country and how this should be evaluated in detail. So this leads that data providers and the financial market participants themselves need to consider some proxies and some approximations to kind of do the best guess to understand what the regulator might be under this. The second thing is thresholds. So one question that we are asked a lot of times is, what is a good principal adverse indicator? What is a bad one in terms of the value? If I have, making it up, 100 tons of CO2 per million euro revenue of my companies, what does it mean? Which benchmark should I compare with? How close or far from the benchmark can I be? So currently this is also done on a more case by case and where financial market participants need to take decisions. And we believe that clarity on them will be helpful. We see only that on Article 8.9's first proposals are being, as Lucia was mentioning, for Article 9's 100% of them will need to be sustainable investment. Article 8 is still to be decided. First proposal sound around 50%. So yeah, let's see how this ends up and whether more clarity can be provided there. And finally, more information on how to apply this to specific asset classes. So we believe that for equities or for general fixed income securities, things are more easy to do in the sense that you can always look at the underlying investment and check to the issuer and check their data. But when you move to more complicated assets, such as derivatives, shorts, or structured products, it's not so easy to see, for example, how to define the principal adverse indicators of a structured product and whether it's the issuer that should be considered, whether it's the underlying investment, how, etc. And when we speak with clients, we see still open questions where they are taking some decisions based on their best understanding, but where clarity would definitely be appreciated. This is on the side of the regulator. What comes for fund manufacturers? Well, now June the 1st of this year was the time where the templates for the pre-contractual and periodic disclosures came into place and where clients are already required to disclose the percentage of EU taxonomy, sustainable investment, and their principal adverse indicators. When we look at the data, we still see that not all financial market participants are disclosing. So we believe it's now the time that data needs to be there, and that it's not that sometimes we see that they believe that it's bad that they disclose data and that they look bad in the picture. We don't believe this regulation is so much about being bad or good, but just about disclosing and being transparent on what your product is about. So we definitely encourage that one and hope that in the next months, the disclosure really boosts.
All right, so lots of work to do still for several fund managers. Go back to your disclosures. All right, well, thanks for this roundup on these questions, but now we have some time to answer some of my further questions. And of course, some questions from the audience, if you have some. Are you able to elaborate on how the PAIs are used to assess the do no significant harm in your research?
Sure, I'll take that, Aline. So what we do is, as suggested in the regulations, we take the mandatory principal adverse indicators. These are 16, and we integrate them into our DNSH. Also, to be clear, this is like the minimum requirements of a DNSH, right? Like you could include other metrics that are not PAI indicators or mandatory PAI indicators. What we're doing in our proposal, we are dividing, or these PAIs can be divided into 3 categories: exposure PAIs, so exposure to fossil fuels, or for example, controversial weapons. Then we have controversy PAIs, like the UN Global Compact violations. And then we have quantitative PAIs, which are for gender diversity, renewable energy, non-renewable energy consumption, and so on. So we divide the PAIs in those 3 groups, and we say an investment is failing DNSH as long as it has either exposure, one exposure PAI, so is exposed to fossil fuels, violates one controversy PAI, so is violating the UN Global Compact, or is performing very badly on the other quantitative PAIs. And by that, we mean it is on the bottom 5th percentile of our universe. So as long as you fail any of these 3 criteria, the investment would be considered to do significant harm.
And then in this do no significant harm spectrum, is there a threshold for what is significant? We were talking about thresholds earlier, and it would help to have some more clarity, but right now, what kind of thresholds do you find?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens here, and basically the regulator is not putting forth any thresholds, and even if like the participants are asking for more clarity, it is also right now the idea is to give that freedom and for you to be able to decide, right, for each market participant. So there is no absolute threshold. I mean to say by that, there is no perfect answer. So what we have done at Clarity, for example, is put this threshold of, okay, no exposure PAI, no controversy, no PAI in the bottom 5th percentile. But the idea is that these are configurable to the different clients, right? We've seen that this approach makes sense to us. We've done our research, validated these numbers, and it excludes a decent amount of investments, about 20% of our universe. And I think, for example, 40% of the MSCI ACWI would do significantly harm. So we are confident. We've gotten informal feedback also from regulators in the EU that this is a threshold they are confident with. But again, we cannot give the clarity that, you know, we need regulators to give. I don't know, Victor, if you'd like to add anything.
Yeah, no, fully aligned. So we are trying to navigate this uncertainty using our data and our database to really define thresholds that make sense. But this is more on our side. And we are, when we discuss with prospects clients, we are happy to, let's say, customize these thresholds if needed, because different methodologies can be applied and still be compliant with the regulation.
Right. Well, now moving on from the PAIs and the DNSH to these article classification. So we've been focusing a lot about Article 9, but when it comes to Article 8, a lot of people are talking about whether it's quite a wide bucket. Do you think there should be an additional layer of classification that includes sustainable investments in different ways?
Yeah, fully agree. So an Article 8, it's a product that needs to have some environmental or social characteristics, but the details on what does this mean is not clear. And we see in the market currently that an Article 8 can really be a lot of things, like from products that have very basic ESG, let's say, assessment on them, until some of them that are more advanced and are close to an Article 9. We do believe the regulator needs to provide further clarity on which is the threshold of sustainable investment they should have. And we believe this is going to happen sooner rather than later. So we have heard first proposal of this 50%, that they should be sustainable investment. And definitely that would change the rules and the number of Article 8s that will be offered to the clients in the end.
Do you have a comment about the UK regulation that's being developed in parallel with the EU regulation? Do you think that there are advantages and disadvantages for the fund managers between the different legislations?
Yes, I believe they are trying to be a bit more precise onto the type of funds that can go in any category. So not having this label of 8 and 9, but really specifying if the fund considers impact or not, or it's only some ESG characteristics. So I believe that this more detail from the beginning will be first easier to understand for both the end client and the different financial market participants, but also will not make that like in the EU, sometimes you have two categories and one of them is that broad that it can mean that the product has everything there. So you don't know Article 8 really what they are about. And I guess the UK in the first proposals, they are doing a better job there.
And I would quickly add, we have a recent, an upcoming paper to assessing the different regulations across geographies and how that adds to the confusion. So watch out for that.
Maybe the topic of a future webinar. All right. Well, back to the Article 9s. What can you say about the coverage? So the coverage of some of the indicators seem to be pretty low at the moment. Did you see this? Did you observe this in Article 9 funds?
Yeah, for sure. So we see very different coverage depending on which principal indicator you look at. So for example, the carbon principal indicators coverage can be quite good. But however, when you look at other ones such as gender pay gap, for example, unfortunately, not many companies are reporting these values. So this makes that when an Article 9 wants to assess really do not significantly harm, this really poses challenges as they cannot look at how all the companies in their portfolio have this metric in particular. Also, there are other metrics that are more industry dependent and also it's challenging how to evaluate them. For example, things like emissions to water or hazardous waste. These metrics really are relevant only to certain sectors. And for example, for a bank disclosing the hazardous waste or emissions to water they produce will not make much sense. So we believe also the regulator needs to think on this, on kind of like applicability for each of the metrics, so that it's more clear which metrics apply to which specific sector, and so that that can be seen as a lack of coverage. It's just that these metrics don't apply and should only be considered in some specific sectors.
Excellent. I'm also curious regarding the coverage. Perhaps it tends to suggest that perhaps some sectors will have an easier time than others. Have you observed that between different Article 9 funds, like for example, thematic funds or sector-focused funds will have an easier time than others?
Yeah, that can definitely influence. So these metrics that I was discussing probably are not so important for the more common thematic funds. So we see Article 9, many funds focus on energy companies, on global warming, on renewable energy companies, or other funds more on the social side that can be focused on the health side of things. So in this case, I don't see specific challenges on metrics for the more common thematic funds. But here, Lucy, I don't know if you have any comment or anything else you want to say.
I just want to, Aline, what exactly are you saying? That they have an advantage because it's easier to measure in some industries? Yeah, definitely. I mean, then as Victor is saying, right? It is industries, and also we have that challenge with geographies also, right? Like, and with even like clients were also telling us, for example, with poor gender diversity, like companies in the East maybe have a very different, they are in a different pace than we are now. So should we look at trajectories? So yeah, it is complicated, and it is not only based on sector, but also geography. So thankfully, there are some legislations coming up so that companies need to report, and then this will be like basically giving fuel to the machine, and everything can run more smoothly.
Interesting. Is there anything you can tell us about the Nordic companies or the Nordic region? How are the companies in the Nordics compared to maybe other parts of Europe in terms of how advanced they are in their reporting?
Yeah, so in general, and I mean, we will need to check our data in detail, but the feeling we have is that probably they are more conscious about the reporting, the companies themselves, than in other regions. So the new regulations coming, of course, they will affect them, but they are in a better situation to tackle things such as CSRD. And that definitely will help. And especially on social topics, there is a clear advance in respect to other regions in terms of reporting and in terms of the values they have. Okay,
good news. Good news for the Nordic investors that are focused on investing in local companies. All right, so now a somewhat more technical question. So if a fund decided to disclose additional information than the one required in SFDR according to their sustainability characteristics, do they need to follow the SFDR formal deadlines? So, for example, January 2023 for product disclosures.
Yes, so in that case, they will not need to do that. So let's, for example, say that Article 6 or Article 8 fund wants to disclose additional metrics such as the EU taxonomy alignment or go one step beyond with principal adverse indicators, they can always do this. And it's always a best practice so that investors have the best visibility, even though they are not specific Article 9 funds. So we definitely encourage that. We believe that would be great for the industry, so that investors always know where they are invested in. And the good thing is that they don't need to follow any specific deadlines. So it's always a good moment.
Excellent. And then beyond that, can you remind us of the next upcoming deadlines, just to set the picture of the work ahead, 2023 and beyond?
Sure. So 2023, as said, January the 1st was a very important date as the pre-contractual periodic reports enter into place. Next big date is June this year, where entities need to disclose their entity level principal adverse indicators. And then probably the next important one will be when the new EU taxonomy objectives come into force. Currently, 2 are already in place: climate change mitigation and adaptation, and 4 more are coming, still not confirmed. Things seems to be leaning towards January the 1st, 2024, but again, still to be confirmed.
Excellent. Patrick Darlin has a follow-up question on regulatory opposals. Do you have data on how regulators have accepted or opposed Clarity AI's estimated data when used by an Article 9 fund or Article 8 fund? For example, how many percentage accepted / opposed?
Yes. So far, we have not heard any opposition to our data up to the moment. So our clients using our regulatory solutions have been able to report on our metrics, and yeah, so far no issues encountered.
That was pretty clear. Do you know on average for the industry how much opposition there is?
Yes, so honestly, I mean, we don't have data outside, let's say, our current clients, so we cannot say. But I also believe that as Lucia was saying before, in this regulatory journey, also regulators are kind of learning to take decisions and looking at the data with more and more care as time goes. So, and just to be also very, very clear that maybe with time they become more stringent and ask for more details, and now not so much. So yeah.
And so to the question of regulators, do you see very strong differences between different parts of Europe again?
On the regulator themselves?
Yeah, on the way that the regulators are controlling the funds and observing the data more in details, perhaps.
We do see some differences when talking with clients about the level of detail, the questions they make. As some ESMA members are probably speeding up more and already have everything in place, while others are delaying their, let's say, looking at this in more detail as the year comes. So yes, those differences, I believe they exist.
All right, we have another question in the chat by Richard. Last year, USIF complained that the SFDR had become a de facto fund classification system for end investors and consumers. And they said that we need a proper fund labeling system instead of misusing a reporting framework. Do you have any views on that?
I fully agree. I have to say that SFDR is not a classification system, and as very well the question has stated, it's a disclosure regime in which, depending what product you bring to the market, you have different disclosures requirements. Unfortunately, it's being used like that because as it's 2 categories, it's very easy to have this misunderstanding. Whether a fund classification proper system is needed or not, I believe that's a really long conversation and something that requires probably a long debate. But yeah, that's probably another interesting topic for another webinar.
Yeah, and I just quickly like to add that we do see that in the data that it is not a label, right? Like Article 6 funds can objectively and currently have better performance than some Article 8 or Article 9 funds, right? So with the principal adverse indicator assessment. So yeah, in the end, it's very even frustrating to see that, right? Because in the end, this seems to go against the objective of the law, which is to drive capital flows towards sustainable investments, whereas this seems to be confusing a bit the picture.
All right, and we have another question from Julia here. She's asking for your impression about fund managers' readiness for the June deadline. What do you think amongst your customer, or maybe your customers are ready and the other ones are not?
Very good question. I have to say that on this first quarter, and we are receiving a lot of questions on exactly this requirement and on the data that we are providing to our clients. So it seems this first quarter has been the time, and we believe that the first month of Q2 will also be very intense for financial market participants to do this, because even we are seeing very large players that are working on this now. So that probably means it's going to be intense the following weeks.
All right, so clearly they're not ready yet.
They're working on it.
All right, okay, very good. All right, well, I think it's time to wrap up with a couple of takeaway points. So clearly still a lot of work to be done in clarifying certain elements, such as, for example, we touched upon thresholds. We also talked about the differences between different parts of Europe as regulators are getting up to speed, and perhaps hiking the expectations gradually on the market participants. We talked about these important deadlines, the very important tasks that lie ahead. I would like to leave you with one last comment, but perhaps Victor and Lucia, what do you think is the most important thing to watch out, except for this deadline, of course?
Lucia, do you want to start, or do you? Okay. To me, I said that the key thing and the takeaway to provide is that given all this uncertainty, key to be transparent, be sure that the data used is the best data you can have, and yeah, don't be afraid of regulations. The opportunity is there. You just need to make things properly and continue bringing sustainability products, and that will in the end improve the world. So we believe that's the right attitude, and to give small steps towards that.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo Victor, and would like to also add that I feel like these, we cannot let these like uncertainty or lack of data, like a perfect number, stop us from making these disclosures. And as Victor is saying, let's not be afraid, but rather understand like the regulation is not there to catch you out. It's there to encourage a certain behavior. And as long as that is your intention, then something has to go very, very wrong for it to backlash onto you. So yeah, let's get more comfortable with doing this in the right way. So through technology, we believe, and more comfortable with doing estimations and, setting the wheels in motion so that one day it will be perfect, but not wait until that day, I would say.
All right, nice optimistic ending to this webinar. So thank you everybody who participated today. Thank you for your good questions. Thank you, Lucia and Victor, for being here today and sharing your expertise with our audience.